understand that Paul talked to you last week about the basketball game, and I thought I'd come and maybe expand on some of the things that he said and talk to you about some of the other things that are going on. I think I'll start out with the game itself. As far as I'm concerned, there was two things that happened that night. There was a basketball game and there was something that happened afterwards. I think Paul probably filled you in on the game. It's a pretty competitive game, would you say, Paul?
Yes, it was.
And it was the second time we played them within a 2-week period. How was the crowd that night? Were they pretty rowdy?
Yeah, it was chippy.
Yeah, it was chippy. It was chippy that night. And did it get worse or better as the night went on?
It stayed pretty consistent, I'd say, throughout.
And I would imagine that when the game was over and the basket went in, there was a lot of elation and a lot of emotion that came out of that time, and people running on the court and stuff like that. You know, we appealed the outcome of the game. We're going to appeal the outcome of the game. It's a process. It's undetermined in length right now. Hopefully we can get to it in 3 or 4 weeks, but we had an attorney that talked to us. And once again, I'm speaking to you as the board president, as my opinions today are my opinions. There's 4 other board trustees. If they came, they would tell you a different story. So please don't attribute anything I say to anyone but me. We appealed the process. We did it in closed session, so I can't go into exactly what was discussed and things like that. But we did vote to appeal. We had till 15 days from the sanctions to do that. And all that does is keep it alive. Okay, so we didn't really appeal anything yet, right? So we have to, the superintendent will have to decide what it is we want to appeal, and then a letter will go out, and it involves a lot of attorneys, and because this is a state type thing, it's going to go to Sacramento, so you can kind of get an idea why the timeline is a little vague right now. The game itself, as I said, I think it was played highly competitively, and it was without incident, as far as I know. Did they call any technicals during the game? Do you remember?
Not that I can recall.
No fights.
The previous game.
Yeah, in the previous game it was, so it was obviously heated. And but there were no technicals and there were no fights or anything like that, correct?
There was never any fights between the players.
And that's why, as I feel that we can, at least, at the very least, the vacating of the title, it should be overturned. And hopefully we can get that title back. Right? The altercation, I think, and then there was the things that happened after the game. All right, so we need to talk about those a little bit. Both fans and coaches and people were yelling and screaming, and there was a lot of animosity all over the place. And there's plenty of blame to go around on both sides. Right? I noticed in the paper that there was some pushback on the decision with what happened with Coach LaPerry. It's very specific in the CIF Code of Ethics, and unfortunately JD used some vulgar terminology and some things that made it look like Coronado did not welcome the other team and just wanted them to go home. So my decision, I was a closed session item also, so I cannot go into with the discussion that went on, but for me, it was nothing to do with tortillas flying or anything like that. It's the fact of the matter that a coach was way out of bounds, and we had to take some action, all right? And that is not acceptable behavior for our coaches. And if other coaches that had to do the same type of thing, I'm expecting there may be a similar result at that time. All right. I think part of the issue is race-based. All right, let's call it what it is. When a tortilla went flying through the air in the direction of the other team, whatever the intent of the person that threw it, and I'm not saying that person had anything other than maybe a spontaneous reaction or whatever. But if you offend someone of another ethnicity, it becomes a racial incident. And despite what some people are saying, that is what made it national news. Right? There was a racial incident that occurred in our gymnasium on that night. And there are people that are feeling differently about it. There are people out there saying it was just unsportsmanlike conduct and it was grown-ups behaving badly and kids out of control or whatever. but it was no racial intent, and that probably is true. An investigation will take. But we needed to, as a board, as the president of the board, I'll put it that way, I felt that we needed to respond to a racial incident that happened in our gymnasium on that given night. All right, so, and we needed to get something out there quickly. The superintendent agreed, he sent out a message, we piled on, people are not happy with the message that we sent. Right? But I personally believe that if we had not sent a message, things would have been worse, and a lot of things that we are getting accused of as our fault, maybe we could have chosen some different words, but we needed to recognize the fact that there was a different class of people, a different race of people, and a different color of people in that building that night. And that was the intent of the message that we tried to get across. It's coming across differently to some people. Maybe we should choose different words, but that is, we needed to express to the people of Orange Glen and the community of Escondido and the Escondido Unified School District that we were genuinely sorry that the incident happened. And it was a racial incident, in my opinion. If you want to look at it differently, you're welcome to do that. I know, I've been in Coronado since '96, for a couple of years, but basically I've been around. And I do not believe we are a racist community. But sometimes I wonder if we are really truly accepting of things that go on the other side of the bridge. I mean, there are things going on in the world today that have happened in the last couple of years that are coming. I mean, we need to recognize that. I know in Coronado here, we don't like change too much, right? We like to keep things the way they are. We're happy with the way that things are. There are things coming down that we at least need to acknowledge. Don't have to agree with them, but there's lots of things going on in the world today. So we've recognized that, I've recognized that as a board member since I first came on the board 7 years ago. One of the first things that I brought up is I felt that we needed to be diverse in our student body, although because we are very, very demographically challenged here in Coronado. Our student body is what our student body is. It's very difficult for us to change what goes on. It's all dependent on who moves in and who moves out. Even with inter-district transfers, we don't get to pick who comes in. When they fill out their application inter-district transfer, they don't put their ethnicity on there. Right? So we have to go on the basis of all the other things, and so we are demographically challenged. But we still need to educate our children in such a way that when they do grow up and they go to the 13th grade or they go to the workforce, that they're going to experience the whole breadth of what America really is. I have 3 sons. My oldest was here, we came here, my oldest in the 10th grade, right? And before that, in the Navy, I had been in Washington, D.C., Virginia Beach, Virginia, Jacksonville, Florida, and that son got to bounce around in a whole bunch of demographically different schools, right? My youngest son came here, he was in the 2nd grade, right? And he progressed through the school system all the way. Village, through middle, through high school, and then he went to the University of Southern California and University of Spokane, call it what you want, and he's got a different outlook. Right? As a school board, what I'm trying to do, as president of the school board, I would like to see us be able to deliver a diversity to the children that we're trying to educate, that when something happens like happened the other night at that game, and a student picks up a tortilla, that there's some thought behind it or some understanding that maybe something I learned in my past 8, 10, 12 years of school, this isn't a good idea to hurl this thing in that direction. If it would have went straight up in the air, out into the court, I don't know, it might have been different, but it created a very challenging situation for the community. And I think when I said we'll talk about some of the other sanctions, one of the things we're being sanctioned is we can't hold playoff games here anymore. Well, the CIF did that because they don't feel we managed that game very well.
I agree.
And Paul agrees with me on that one, all right? So I'm probably not gonna be challenging that one too much, all right? I mean, we needed to, if there would have been a stronger security presence, and we should have known that, in my opinion, because we just played them the week before in a very challenging game. And I'm not saying CIF is
Neutral court, which was ideal.
yeah, and that's the other thing. Wow, this is a CIF championship game, and this is another COVID thing, right? It's played on our court. If it would have been non-COVID, they would have had some neutral court set up somewhere with the normal CIF security or whatever, and it would have been managed differently. We were not prepared to host that game in the fashion it needed to be hosted. Had we had done that, you know, people, I think the crowd would have been more tense throughout the night because they would have seen security people walk by. We'd have had 2, 4 policemen in the building. It would have been extremely difficult, right? And I understand there was some very challenging things going on behind the bench. I don't know who was over there at the scores table and things like that, behind their bench, challenging our bench and things like that. Those type of things we should have been prepared to handle, and we weren't able to do that very well. So I kind of see us right now at a crossroads of the community, not just the school district, because my friends that live, I have plenty of friends that live on the other side of the bridge, and despite what we like to think of ourselves, they have a much more elitist view of what's happening in Coronado. Maybe not racist view, but I think it's an elitist view, and I'm not comfortable with that. I don't think I'm more elite than the next person. So we're trying to own this and trying to get past it. We'll do what we can with the appeal. But I wanted to come and talk to you about that. I can take a couple of questions if somebody wants to hit me with questions. Yes, Paul.
Thank you, Lee, for coming, and I think it's good to everybody share their ideas and thoughts. I appreciate yours. I appreciate what you said about you don't believe that the 2 boys from the Islanders basketball team that threw to Tortillas had intent, or you don't know that they had intent. Is that right?
Right, and I see where you're going with this, but go ahead.
Yeah, and actually,
Can you take the mic so we can hear you?
Yeah. Can you,
Oh, I'm sorry.
For
I'm
Zoom,
sorry.
let's do the mic. I'll pass it around.
Okay.
Go ahead.
all right.
Go ahead.
But I appreciate that you mentioned that they don't know if it's intent, with particularly the 2 young boys at the end of the bench that didn't even play in the game that threw Tortillas. And I think the misperception, I guess, to have to ask you, Lee, is that they threw them at the players and coaches. They did throw them, I think, at the coaches, but they threw them at me because everything happened in front of the Islander bench. The Orange Glen bench was a ghost town. That's because all of the Orange Glen coaches and 4 or so of their adult fans charged our coaches. And I was in the middle of it because I was filming and bringing Alex over. And these kids, you know, you'll have to find out from the investigators what their intent was and so forth. But I've got a dog, and if somebody goes after me, he's going to bark and start to try to bite him. Somebody gave him tortillas, they would have basketballs or whatever. They would have thrown them at the attackers. And big DJ Jackson, if you remember him when he played, somebody knocked him right on the ground. 225, 6'5", former center for the Islanders. He's about 22 years old. So it was a little bit of a fracas, and who knows what was in their mind.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'll respond to that. As I said, there was plenty of pushing and shoving and bad behavior all around that night. And there are ongoing investigations. We've hired an investigator, Orange County's hired an investigator, CIF has already done. I don't know if they're still investigating, but there's lots of investigations going on. And I am hoping that through that process, people see what you've brought up and that there was ill intent on both sides. And I mean, but I don't know what Orange Glen is going to decide to do with their fans and the people that were there and their coach, if they're, as I understand, you know, you got some crosswords too. I hope they would look at that and.
May I just say one more thing about the players?
About the players. Okay.
Players on both teams, I think they're the shining example for all of us. They were respectable. The Orange Glen players were out in the court area, not in the path of those tortillas. Their arms were down. They were very respectful, and as were the Islander players.
All the more reason that I don't believe the vacation of the title was the right thing to do.
Right.
Question from George.
Billy, I'm a bit of an outsider, you know, because I'm not a resident here, but it seemed to me, my memory is that a year or two ago, there was a lot of talk around the town that you guys, I don't know if you personally, but the board had been getting a lot of feedback from past alumni of Coronado High about sort of the lack of sensitivity to, you know, a diverse community that they felt they were leaving Coronado High with and going into so quote real world, and there is going to be some adjustments in curriculum and things like that. So where does that stand? And I think that's something like that's a first good step anyway towards some of the things you talked about.
Great points, George. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see my smiling face with Paul Rudy on TV yesterday morning, but he asked me a similar type of question to that. We recognized that at the time, and there was some pushback at that time from certain groups, but as the superintendent and the school board, we recognized that we needed to do better in some areas, and we have implemented some programs that are moving us in that direction. Those programs are getting some pushback from certain groups also. So we instituted this No Place for Hate program, and then there's pushback on that. We have an equity committee right now that we established to tackle exactly some of those problems. There's pushback on the way that's going on too. All that tells me is it's a difficult conversation to have, and as Trustee Antrim says that all the time. It's a difficult conversation to have, but one that needs to be made. And so we are pursuing, we're going to continue to pursue that. We're going to talk about it at our next general board meeting. And we've been discussing some other opportunities to let the town talk about that too.
Just speak loud. Just speak loud.
Yeah. So just a thought, okay? When my children were young, we lived up in Arcadia, California, which was sort of Coronado, the San Gabriel Valley, as far as ethnicity and stuff. And then we had a large influx of Asians coming into Coronado because of the quality of the school district and a lot of issues, not dissimilar issues. When my kids were in 8th grade, we moved from Arcadia High School to Philadelphia, and to a very nice school district there, sort of the very homogeneous area of Philadelphia. But my 8th grade daughter said to me, after she started going to school there, said, "Dad, the authors and the people that they have, the kinds of books that we're reading here in school, there's no diversity in this at all." And so even an 8th grader recognized the diversity, the lack of diversity, just in who the books are, but they're reading. Forget about some of the hate stuff and some of the training that I know gets controversial, but just as simple as what they're reading in school from who's writing it.
We've talked about that at board meetings recently. I don't know, you can go back and view those. As I said, I speaking for myself, there's other trustees, I don't want to speak for them. It's a big no-no amongst us. I agree that we need to be more diverse in what we offer our children. Now, we have to be careful of that because nationally there's this movement going on. And everybody is scared to death about critical race theory coming into our school system. And that is a huge topic and one that is gaining a lot of pushback. I have feelings about that. sometimes I say, you know what, I don't want that, no, I don't want that. It's just, no, I don't want that for young kids, all right? That's not gonna be the place. And maybe we don't want it for the older kids either, but I'm thinking about my son, you know, that young son. Maybe when he was a junior or senior, he's mature enough to at least understand that that is a theory. There's nothing concrete behind it except some studies. And then when he goes off to college and he goes into his first sociology class, what's the first thing they're going to drop on him?
Critical race.
Critical race theory. And he's never heard, what's that? I don't have it, you know? So that's how I feel. Yeah, no, we don't need to go down to the first grader and then whack, you know, hit him with that stuff. But at some point, I mean, when I went to college, I was my high school, late 60s, early 70s, and I'm off to college. The big thing back then was segregation, right? That's right, civil rights acts and things like that, and they were busing people back and forth. And I'm going, well, this is crazy, you know, right? Busing people, you know, community over lunch just costs a lot of money, and it's just creating much problem that I think is the right thing to do. I go off to college, and I'm in my first college class, and one of my dorm mates says to me, you know, while making that argument, he goes, do you really believe that those students that are going to those other schools are getting the same education that you're getting at your school? And that had never crossed my mind because I had been introduced to other people with other opinions like that. And of course, that's why they call it liberal arts education, right? I mean, it opened my eyes and started me thinking in different directions. And I don't think that's wrong for very mature children. But there are going to be those that come at me right now, and when they see this, they're going to say, oh, critical race theory is coming to Coronado. Well, it's not coming to Coronado, right? And even if we decided to do some of the things I'm talking about, maybe we don't do it for everybody. Maybe we just make one or two of our 12th grade social science classes designated that you're going to at least drop that topic on them. But if other people don't want that at all, then we'll have some other courses where we don't do that at all. And you'll be able to matriculate if you don't want that in your student. But those are just my ideas and my thoughts, and that's nothing that's in concrete by any stretch of the imagination. And you guys are welcome to write in your opinions. We get plenty of those.
Just before we're going to take two more questions, Dave and Jim. Then, I'm sorry, John. Roy said he couldn't hear nor tell who the speaker is. It's Lee Pontes, and we are doing a video. Cynthia's videoing it, so we will have a video on our website. We have issues with Zoom. Good, Dave.
Sorry.
I figured you would.
Well, everybody was asking.
And let me echo the comments earlier. Thank you. You're in a difficult position, irrespective of the issues. You, right or wrong, become a bit of a lightning rod for the Board of Education, and I thank you for serving the community in a difficult position, especially now. To get back to the basketball game, do you feel that the firing of the coach is now then prejudicing other people's opinions about what happens afterwards, whether it's vacating the title or creating some training programs or things like that? And if not, then how do you respond to, or how do you create a storyline that deals with that so that we can kind of keep things on a level plane?
As I mentioned earlier, and I said this on TV, the firing of the coach had nothing to do with the torches. All right, it was strictly a very flagrant violation of CIF Code of Ethics. All right, so whatever CIF wants to make of that, they can make of that. All right, but yeah, we do need to come up with a line of argument of why we feel that it is the right thing to do to not vacate the title and to give the title back to the Coronado where it belongs.
Does the high school have to be part of CIF for athletics, or did Coronado just decide to be independent?
State of Texas.
Blumenthal, help me with this one. I would say probably could go independent. I mean, I think there's probably some private schools, I think, Mark, maybe that play independently, but we would have trouble finding people to play.
It becomes more of a club type atmosphere.
Yeah,
And that's the
you're
way
not
it is in
gonna,
off-season anyway.
I don't think we can get around CIF, no.
All right, one last question.
Was the coach, did the coach also lose his job as a teacher, or was it just a coach?
No, just his coaching responsibilities. He's still a teacher at Strand School.
So he can reapply as a coach somewhere if they're willing to take him, because the CIF is not sanctioning him.
Not to my knowledge, CIF had no sanction on the coaches other than we need to do some training with them. Yeah, no, I don't see why he could do that. I don't see why he couldn't come back and reapply for us at some other time.
Is there an avenue to reinstate coach? Is there an avenue? Is it possible? I'm just throwing it out there. Is it possible? I've said this till I'm blue in the face.
Yeah.
In the movie Hoosiers, they all took a vote, and they said, let's re-vote, coach stays. Now the question is it possible to take a look and say, you're suspended for a certain period of time, where that's concerned? Well, does he have an avenue to appeal his firing?
I don't know of any formal process for doing that. Could he initiate it on his own? Could some of you initiate that? I would suspect maybe you could. You know, we are trying to put to bed the rest of this issue right now, and I'm not sure how favorable of a reception it would get at this particular time, but
Could it be a message from us, a community, especially when he made a big mistake in his behavior?
right.
Can we forgive? And can we say that would he go through training, or is this his death nail that will be in his file forever when he goes somewhere? Just like you had a DUI or anything like that.
Right. I don't know how, I mean, administratively, I'd have to ask HR to answer some of those questions for you. I'd be speculating.
At least from this side of it, since, by the way, everybody, Chris, you know me, I don't tactfully just ask for a chance to talk, I just start talking. My dad always said that, thank you, perfect segue. My dad always said, my son Mark never disliked a microphone that he could talk into. He never saw a microphone that he disliked. But the biggest thing my dad would have said, because when Lee first came to town, we were ecstatic about the Pontes because they had 3 boys coming into the program. A kid that was bigger than anybody on our team as a sophomore, and another player for us to play basketball with on Saturday mornings, which included my dad and me. We met Lee and the whole family. They became part of us immediately. And then we suffered the biggest shock you could ever handle. Not like this thing. All in a ball game up in Newport Beach, and we lose our quarterback and he dies on the field. You guys remember that?
Yep.
Yep. And we got a memorial to him outside the end of
There's a memorial down on the field. And what's it all about? Because one thing that my dad saw, it took the community, the city council and the school board had to approve a community redevelopment agency. And every good thing that you see over at the campus right now is because there was an idea that my dad just happened to see up in Sacramento at a seminar, came back, told me when he just got back and we were playing, saying, hey, this old gym that we can't play basketball with this morning because we're rained out because of the roof. We're going to be able to have a brand new gym. Now, isn't it ironic? The same place where we said goodbye to Dave Blumenthal in the Blumenthal Sports Complex, this happened. But I can tell you this, one thing my dad would say in all of it: are you learning something? Are we learning something? And I have to say, Lee, did I leave you a message on your voice recorder?
I got back to you once, but.
You did, no, but you did. And the thing was, I was blown away by what this district and this community did during COVID and what our school board put together to bring our kids along while we were all suffering together. And I had to call and find out, because one of the big things we have an 8th grader ourselves, Wilson James Blumenthal, who's on the water polo team, and he graduated just the weekend at middle school, just before this whole thing happened. I was so taken by the fact is that I saw everybody there. Lee was there at the graduation for middle school. I had to call him up and say, my grandson is the perfect example as to what happened during COVID. He was not a shining star in class when we had regular classes. As a matter of fact, he was a poor performer. But when everybody hunkered down and got together with their parents helping them every day to make sure they got the classes done, that was direction of our school board all the way down through the superintendent, all the way down to the bottom. He went from being a poor performer, and then we find out that he's student of the month while he's at home. Then we find out he's graduated with honors from middle school going to the high school, and that's where he's going to be this fall. He's inherited this death knell, this sentence. And I can tell you this guy here, he stood up and he had to do what he needed to do at that moment. Because we, like my dad used to say, this is our gym, we are the hosts, and regardless of how it all took place, it's time to stand up and say, we're sorry, we didn't realize it was going to happen, but it sure looked like what everybody's saying that it is, and it wasn't. But first of all, you have to do is stand up and apologize, and that's where I'm at. And I want to thank your man. Thank you for helping my grandson along.
On a different topic, Mike, I can tell you that Governor Newsom signed a bill just recently that requires all schools, all public schools, to continue to offer online education should people want to continue along that path. Students do not have to go back to the classroom. They can continue to Zoom if they're thriving in that environment, as Wilson seems to be doing. So you'll have your choice.
Good.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. That was great. And also thank you, Mark, our second guest speaker.
Actually, that was.
Good.